Hi, my name is Meredith Halford, and this is my cultural immersion project for my multicultural counseling course at Liberty University with Dr. Nicola Williams. So, I chose to do my presentation on Catholicism, and the reason I chose this is because I was born and raised Christian, and my husband was born and raised Catholic. Together, we have three beautiful children, and they're all at an age where they are able to start making their own decisions as far as their religions go. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be unbiased during this process, so I wanted to do my research and make sure I understood the Catholic belief if my kids came to me with any questions. In this paper, I'll talk about the similarities and differences between Catholicism and Christianity. I'll explore how I went to several events in the Catholic religion and my experience there. I'll talk about counseling and oppression, and then also a couple interviews that I had with members of the Catholic belief. So, first, I want to start with a Christian service. So, usually, Christian churches have service on Sundays. At this time, you go in and you walk through the doors. There's usually someone there to greet you. You're seated in a pew. When the service starts, they start with a prayer. From prayer, we go to worship. From worship, there would be more prayer and worship in between where you give tithes and offerings. Then you would have the weekly announcements for the church, and then the preacher would give his sermon. After the sermon, the preacher would ask those who did not know the Lord if they would like to come to the Lord, and for those who have strayed, if they want to come back. Those people that raised their hands would come to the front of the church, and there he would recite the Lord's Prayer with them, and they would ask God to come into their hearts. A Catholic Mass. I actually attended one, and I'll talk briefly about it later in my presentation. But for Catholic Mass, it was a different experience for me since I had never been to one and I had not done my research on it before I went. So, walking through the doors, you see holy water. And as you walk through, there is it's very ritualistic experience. So we first walk in and you see these stained glass windows, and it's just like this beautiful, nostalgic spiritual experience. Once I was seated, they began by an opening prayer. And from the opening prayer, I learned that unlike Christians, the Catholics drop to their knees to pray, and as they pray, the first thing they do is give the sign of the cross, which is putting your fingers to your forehead, down to your stomach, and then your right shoulder to your left shoulder. And this symbolizes the cross that Jesus died on. After that, it was preceded by readings and a gospel and a prayer, and then they say the Eucharist prayer, and that's where the priest raises his hands and says, The Lord be with you. Lift your hearts. Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. From there, they go into communion, and I'm going to talk more about communion here. So, at a Catholic communion, there are actual guidelines that need to be followed in order to receive communion. And this is something that's very different than the Christian belief. Christians do believe that once you're baptized and you have ask the Lord to come into your heart, that you are able to partake in communion. While I was at the Catholic Church, I did not take in communion because I was unsure of the guidelines and because I had not done my research before. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't committing any sacrilegious thing. And I'm glad I did because there are specific guidelines for Catholic communion. So the first guideline is that a person must be in a state of grace. Next, they must have gone to confession since their last sin. Third, they must believe in the doctrine of transubstantiation. And lastly, they must observe the Eucharist fast. So I'm glad I did not partake in communion. However, communion is symbolic. It means basically the same thing in both the Catholic and Christian religion. The wine represents the blood of Christ, and the cracker represents the body of Jesus who died on the cross for our sins. Next, we have Catholic saints, and Catholic saints are very different in beliefs from what we believe as Christians. Catholics believe that saints are spiritual guides to help you on your religious journeys. And people become saints because in their lifetime they were a martyr or they performed some exemplary event that made them special in the eyes of the Lord. And therefore, they become saints and they are worshiped for specific things by the Catholic religion. For example, there is a saint called Saint Peregrine Lazioso, and he's a 14th century saint, and he actually died of cancer, and he was made the patron saint for cancer patients. So, in the Catholic belief, if you have a tribulation, there's different saints for different tribulations. And what happens is that you usually have a candle with that saint on it, and there is a specific prayer that you would say to that saint to help you with that trial or tribulation. Catholic or Christians are very opposite in this belief, and I think this is one of the biggest things and the biggest controversies between the two. Um, Christians believe that the Bible tells us that we should only honor God, and Exodus 23 states, "You shall not have any other gods before me." So, saints in the Christian belief system are more like burying false idols, and they do not condone it. So that was a major difference between the two religions, and it's like spiritual preference. I'm not one to say which is right and which is wrong. Next, Catholics also have confession, which is something Christianity does not have. In the Catholic confession, you would go into a little booth with a priest on the other side. You would do your sign of the cross, and you would commit, or you would tell about your the sins that you've committed, and the priest would then offer penance and prayer and tell you maybe you need to say so many Hail Marys or certain things that you can do to cleanse your soul. Christian belief, there is no confession in Christian belief. What we believe is that if you are facing any hardships or you've done something wrong, that you pray to God on your own time about it, and that your spirit or your prayers will be lifted up to Him, and He will be able to answer those for you. Next, Catholics believe about afterlife is that once you die, your body immediately goes to God to be judged at the gates of heaven. And if you have a clean and pure soul, then you will be able to enter through the gates. If your soul is not clean and pure, you go to a state of purgatory. And in purgatory, there's phases that you go through, and it's a cleansing of the soul type of process. For Christians, they do not believe in purgatory. There's just heaven and hell. So you go to God to be judged. And if the Christian belief is that if you have been baptized and you've accepted the Lord into your heart and you've followed the 10 Commandments, that you will receive the gates of heaven. If you do not do those things, then you would actually go to hell. The Catholics The Catholics have faced much oppression during history. During the French Revolution, many priests and Jesuits came over to the New World. And once they got here, they actually suffered just as much persecution here because the Protestant faith was already something that was a staple here in the New World. So when Catholics came, they wanted to make changes to the school system and having religion in public places and in politics. And it started a confrontation between the Protestants and the Catholics. However, the Catholics were able to stand their ground, and they ended up establishing and opening up several Catholic schools, and later Georgetown University became a prominent one in the history books. And also, they began opening up Catholic hospitals. So, I talked about how my experience was when I attended the Catholic Mass. There were very good moments and There were also moments where I felt very uneasy just because I just felt like a fish out of water sometimes. So when they were dropping to their knees or when they were saying their prayers and I didn't know what was happening around me, I felt the need or the want to close down. And I just had to stay open minded and really take in the experience. Everyone around me was very opening and warm, and there was no judgment by others. It was just a personal thing and in my head that I had to overcome during that process. Attending the Catholic funeral was very similar to Catholic Mass. There was the ritualistic approach, which I liked more than a Catholic or a Christian service because they the whole experience was absolutely beautiful. And the difference between that of a Catholic funeral and a Christian funeral is that it is the Catholic funeral is similar to a regular mass, and then at the graveside is where they would actually talk about the person or the deceased and give stories. For the Christian belief, a preacher usually says a few words, and then the family and friends come up and give life experiences or stories with that person. And I just felt the Catholic actually gave it a much more spiritual feel to the service, and I enjoyed that. So at my interview with St. Timothy's, I spoke with Joan Spallone, and she gave me the mission statement basically straight off of their paperwork, which was basically that anyone and everyone is welcome to their church. It does not matter of gender or spirituality, race, ethnicity, any of that is irrelevant. They want everyone to come and worship the Lord. She told me about numerous things to be involved in at the church. The Knights of Columbus, they have funerals, they have baptisms, they have confirmations and weddings, and there's a ton of different events and ways to get involved in the community through that church. So that's something that I might actually take my kids to do and start becoming part of their ministry as well as with my own church so that they can see firsthand their pros and cons of each and what they prefer. My favorite part of this presentation was my interview with this Catholic couple. They have actually been married for 33 years, or they've been together 33 years. They were able to get married when the law passed. And as you can see, they had a major breakthrough in this picture. The partner actually became a deacon at his church this January. And they told me of all the trials and tribulations that got them to that point, and it was just an amazing interview with lots of great experiences and lots of hardships they had to overcome. In the church, homosexuality is frowned upon, and finding a church that accepted them and believed in them and let them worship with the rest of the congregation was something that was hard for them, and it took a lot of time and practice. So it was definitely a good story to hear. Lastly, there's two types of counseling that are best suited for Catholics, and one would be the Catholic psychotherapy. So, with this type of therapy, it is guided in spiritual type counseling with sacraments and the religious belief. And I think that's important for many Catholics that their therapists understand their religious preference and why they view things the way that they do. And then there's also the spiritually oriented psychodynamic psychotherapy. Again, in this therapy type, God is the all knowing, and the end requirement. So everything is how do I get to God? And this type of belief or this type of therapies help Catholics to understand that everything in their religion leads to a greater purpose. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. We talked about the similarities and differences of the Catholic religion and Christianity. And I revealed several sources that offered guidance as far as um, different beliefs between the two and my own spiritual journey. Attending those Catholic churches. We talked about Catholic oppression, and we had a couple interviews with those of the Catholic belief. Have a wonderful day.